Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Younes, and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to break down all of the major steps and phases of a project using a recent project that I completed as an example. But first, if you're enjoying this show, it really helps us if you like, follow, or share this episode with a friend. Remember that every share helps more fire service professionals learn the skills and mindset to deliver better, smarter projects. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome, everyone. So today, what I wanted to do was take a project that I recently closed out, and I wanted to break it down phase by phase using the five what are called process groups from the Project Management Institute. And if you don't know what that means, bear with me. I'm going to explain all of it. But the reason that I wanted to do this was I think sometimes when we talk about projects and we talk about, an individual phase, whether that's planning or closing or whatever, sometimes it can be hard to understand how it all fits together. So I thought it might be useful to give you the anatomy of a project. And the project that I chose to explain this through is a really interesting project that I recently had. And this was a project that was given to me by my boss, which we talked about on a previous episode. Projects can come from a lot of different places. And this particular project came from my boss. And the project was a multi-agency project, which was aimed at providing CPR and stop the bleed training to about 160 K through 12 school security officers for the school system within my county. And so in order to pull this project off, we had to collaborate with our emergency management and workplace safety agency, our schools, and our park and recreations department. And the reason that I identify that at the beginning is because when you have a lot of different agencies that you're working with or a lot of different stakeholders, that can add layers of complexity to a project, or you can use it to help you get more things done. So we'll talk about that as we move forward with this episode. But what we needed to do was provide CPR and stop the bleed training to 160 school security officers, and we needed to get it done before the school year started. And so the first phase of any project is going to be the initiation phase. And to be clear, where I'm getting these phases from is the Project Management Institute breaks down what they call the 49 process groups. And, I'll be totally honest with you, I don't really like that terminology because when a normal person hears the 49 process groups, they have absolutely no idea what that means. And so let me explain a little bit how PMI structures projects. So you have what they call the 49 process groups, which we should just call the 49 steps to a project. And they break those steps down into 5 phases, which is initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And the 49 process groups start at the beginning in initiation and they end at the last stage of closing. So the phases of the project span from the beginning to the end, and the 49 process groups are all the steps involved in a project, starting with the very first step of initiation and ending with the very last step of closing. So with that being said, the first phase is initiation. Oh, actually, one more thing I want to say about that. When we look at these 49 process groups, I think the normal temptation is to say, wow, that is a ton of steps that are required for every project. And what I would say to that is this is where I think I see the biggest parallel to ICS. And so think about this. We all know the ICS chart when it's all the way filled out. You have your 4 groups and you have section leaders and groups and all these different things. And if you just go to a house fire, a kitchen fire or whatever, you're not going to set up a full ICS structure. It's too much. You don't need it. You need an IC, you need a safety officer, and you need a fire suppression group and maybe a rescue group. No need for finance, no need for all the other fancy groups to get set up. And it's like that with projects too. There's 49 process groups, but we don't need to use every 49 or every single one of those 49 process groups on every single project. In fact, if we think about the 49 process groups as the 49 steps involved in a project that had 49 process groups in it would be the equivalent of a mega code. The mega code is, you go for your paramedic training and you have this cardiac arrest where everything goes wrong. So you can practice like the maximalist version of running a cardiac arrest. Well, that's how it is with these 49 process groups. 49 process groups represents the most complicated that you can make a project. And what I've found is that fire department projects typically have like 10 or 20 of those individual process groups. So anyways, enough about that. I'm going to explain more as we go through, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on that just so that what I'm saying makes sense as I go through the rest of it. Okay, so first group is initiation. This is the first things you're going to do when you get that project. And the first thing I like to do whenever I get a project is I just want to understand the project. Like, where is it coming from? Why are we doing this now? Who's involved? Where's the funding coming from? What's the timeline on this? So just basic information so that I can help kind of shape it and form this project up in my brain and start thinking about it. So first thing I did when I got this project was I started asking questions. And really there's no like formal template for this. It's just me asking the questions that I want answers to so that I can better understand the project. Now, the next thing that happens in the initiation stage of a project, and this is going to happen on pretty much every single project you ever do, you need to figure out who are your stakeholders. Now, for this project, we were trying to provide CPR training to all these different school security officers. So our stakeholders were going to be our director of EMS, our operational medical director, the head of our county school security, a supervisor and lead CPR trainer from emergency management and workplace safety, and myself. That was the key stakeholders that I identified for our project. And the reason that that's important is because, and we'll get into this as we move into the episode, you have all these people that, and just to back up a step, a stakeholder is someone who is affected by, impacted by, or just has skin in the game for your project. So all the people that I listed are going to be directly linked to this project in one way or another. Okay, the next thing you need to do on every single project you pretty much ever could possibly run is collect requirements. Now, we've talked about this a bunch because it may be the single most important part of a project. Certainly in the beginning of a project it is. And the requirements are, if you were to jump in a time machine and go to the very end of this project and you look back on it and you say, man, that was a great project. We really did a good job. What individual elements would have had to be met in this project for us to say that? So the analogy that I've used many, many times is if I was building a shed for you in your backyard and I just build any old shed that I want, is that going to be a successful project? No, it's not, because you probably had individual requirements that had to be met. Maybe the shed needed to have electricity, or maybe it needed to be 30 by 30, or maybe it needed to have a pitched roof. All of those details that you needed to have met throughout the project are called requirements. And it is so, so important to collect those requirements, which is just basically figuring out what exactly does this project need to entail. It is so critical to do that on the project, because if you don't do that, you're very, very likely going to get halfway or all the way through your project and realize you have missed key elements of it. And where do those requirements live? How do you collect them? Well, they live in people's heads and stakeholders' heads, to be specific. And that's why it's so critical at the start of a project to identify your stakeholders, because you really, really need them in order to collect those requirements. Okay, so we collected our requirements, which consisted of me putting together a Word document table, which has, just a few different columns, name of the requirement, added by, description of, stuff like that. And I sent it to all of the different stakeholders and they started filling them in. And once we collected all of the requirements, and that meant, give it about 2 weeks, send that document around to everybody. and then review it with everyone. Hey, these are the requirements we have on our list. Is this a comprehensive list of all the requirements? Meaning, if we did all these things, is the project done? So once we collected all of our requirements, we then put that together into our scope. All right, and I'm actually getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let me back up just one step. Before we put all of our requirements together into a scope, the last thing we need to do is figure out who is on our team, our project team. Now, I know this seems redundant because you're like, all right, we just figured out our stakeholders. How is that different from the team? The way I differentiate that, if somebody is on your project team, that means you can assign them work. Now, for example, our operational medical director is a stakeholder because he sets the standards for our EMS training. I'm not going to assign him work on this project. I'm not going to say, hey, doc, I need you to do this, this, and this. Now, to be clear, he's a great guy, and he absolutely would do that if I gave him work, but he's not on the team, meaning I'm not going to give him assignments to get done. So who was on the team? Well, in this particular project, the team consisted of, and it was a small team, me, our head trainer, CPR trainer for emergency management and workplace safety, the head of school security, and our EMS director. So that was the group of people that were actually getting all these things done. All right, now we're moving into the planning stage of the project. So we started with initiation, next is planning. Now in the planning section of the project, what we did was we took those requirements and we turned them into a scope document. And this is where AI can be a really valuable tool, I've found. If you have a really good list of let's say, 15 or 20 requirements, and it's things like, must include all school security school security officers, must be completed before the school year starts, must include stop the bleeding, must include certification being issued at the end of this training. And you have 10, 20, whatever, all these requirements. You can put those into ChatGPT or whatever and say, turn these requirements into a scope document. And obviously with anything that you put into AI, you want to review it very carefully because it can make mistakes. But this is a great way to synthesize those requirements into a crisp scope document. All right, so now we have our scope. Now the next step is you take that scope and you are going to break it down into what's called an activities list. Now think about this like you have your high level stuff. The scope is going to say, we will provide training to this many people. The training will consist of this, this, and this. It will be completed by this date. It will include certification, et cetera, et cetera. These are all high level things. The activities list is details. So if I say, I will communicate this project to our fire department, that's high level. The activities involved in that are put together a fire roll email and add a paragraph to our departmental weekly brief. Those will be the two steps that are required to communicate this. So when you make that activities list, you look at your scope and you take high-level things and you break it down into individual pieces of work that you could assign to a project team member. So I can't go to a person on my team and say, hey, do communication. But I can go to them and say, hey, draft an email to send to the whole fire department and then write a 1-paragraph excerpt to put in our weekly newsletter. Okay, so that's just an example of how we break our high-level scope down into individual pieces of work for our activities list. Okay, so now once we have our activities list, we can make a schedule very easily. And the way we do that is we figure out, okay, when did this project start and when does it need to end by? Okay, those are the outer limits of our project. And then we plug the rest in. Okay, well, we know the classes are going to be this date and this date and this date, and we know we need to do, communication a week before or whatever. We plug in those individual activities along our timeline, and that gives us our schedule. Now, if you don't have enough information to make a schedule, which actually happens more than you might think, what I like to do is put together milestones. So milestones you can think about like chapters in a book. So communication is complete would be a milestone. Logistics are secured, classes delivered, project closed out, or something like that. Just like the main sections of work or the chapters in a book. If you were going to write this project out like a book, what would the chapters be? Those are milestones. And the last thing we're going to do is turn our schedule into a budget. Now with this project, the main cost associated with this project is just overtime hours. There was a small amount of soft goods that we needed. but the majority of the cost was just overtime hours. So the budget basically consisted of looking at all of the different activities that we plugged in along the schedule and estimating how many overtime hours were associated with each one. So, we get to our first class and I think, okay, I'm going to have 3 instructors. The class is going to be 4 hours. So 3 times 4 is 12. So that section there is going to cost me 12 hours of overtime. And you just go through the whole timeline and you do that. Okay, after that, we identified locations where we were going to host this training. So that involved reaching out to our partners over at Parks and Recreation, who were kind enough to identify several different locations for us to host these different training classes at. The next thing after that was we created a list of all the equipment and soft goods we needed and sent that list out to all of our different stakeholders who were then able to say, okay, well, I have, let's say you need 30 training mannequins. I have 20. And then another stakeholder would say, well, I've got, I've got 10. So now we have all of our training mannequins. So we send out that list of equipment to all of our stakeholders so that we can identify where that equipment is and then make a plan for picking it up and staging it. The planning section of this project also included reserving all of our seats for the class. Like, well, hey, we have 160 people. We need 160 CPR cards. So we need to reserve 160 seats in the class. We put together a list a sign-up genie for OT. We sent that out after we'd identified the dates for the classes and how many people we needed. And of course, we communicated all this to our head of school security, who was, obviously a key stakeholder, so that he can do the scheduling on his end. And once all that was done, we created our schedule. These are the dates that we're doing the classes on. Excuse me. These are the firefighters on overtime that'll be teaching them. This is where they're located. This is the equipment that's going to need to be staged for this class and this class and this class. And then, of course, communication. Once that's done, we want to communicate this and say, all right, stakeholders and team, here's where we're at. This has been done. This is the location for this, and so on and so forth. Okay, now we've got all of our planning done. Now let's talk about what the execution and the monitoring for this project looked like. And so to take a step back, PMI describes, which is the Project Management Institute again, they describe execution and monitoring as 2 separate phases of a project. But I always put them together, or I usually put them together when I'm explaining this because they happen at the same exact time. Once you start executing, you start monitoring. And so the execution essentially consists of, now it's go time. Let's actually do the things we planned to do. So this means a week before the first class, I'm checking in, hey, just making sure the spot that we reserved is good to go, making sure all these people that are signed up on overtime are actually going to be there, confirming that the equipment is staged where it needs to be, so on and so forth. And then when the first class starts, go to the class, check in with the people that are teaching, make sure they have everything they need, check in with the stakeholders, update your stakeholders. Hey guys, first class has started, going well, so on and so forth. So that's the execution side. Now we're actually going to start doing the things. So let's talk about monitoring. And this is the thing I think I get the most questions about, like all things considered. What do you measure? So let me tell you exactly what I measured on this project. Class attendance. So, hey, we needed to get this many people through. We were supposed to have 40 people in this class. Did we have 40? No, we had 38. Okay, so we had whatever percent that is, attendance. Overtime usage. So the overtime usage is, I estimated I would use 16 hours on this day. I actually used 20, or I actually used 12. So overtime usage compared to what I estimated it would be. The next one is end user satisfaction. So that's conducting a survey after every class for the participants. Basic questions. Hey, 1 out of 5, how did you like the class? 1 out of 5, how was the information presented? Stuff like that. How are our end users receiving the information? And then lastly, percent certified. So we know, hey, this is the amount of people we needed to get certified when this whole project is done, and this is the amount we delivered. So those are the individual metrics that I was tracking. And so as the execution phase starts, meaning we have our classes, and technically in my mind, the execution phase of this project started about a week before our first class, because that's when I'm going out and checking on all the things that we have set up, verifying everything. And then, of course, actually going to the individual classes. We have one on Monday, one the following Monday, one the Monday after that. So going to those classes and checking in, making sure that they have everything they need. And, of course, updating our key stakeholders throughout. Now, the last stage of the project is closing. And this is one I like to talk about a lot because I think that in the fire service particularly, but really everywhere, the closing phase of a project is the one that we most often miss or kind of phone it in. And, the project is over, or it feels like it's over. We've gotten some great stuff done, and we have a lot of other things. So we just kind of want to move on. And we lose a lot of valuable stuff when we don't close a project the right way. So let's talk about what's involved in closing this particular project out. So the first thing you want to do when you're closing a project is you want to tie up loose ends. So loose ends are things like, hey, Parks and Recs loaned us 20 CPR mannequins, but they're still sitting at this location where the class was, and so somebody needs to go pick them up and take them back to this location. Or hey, we need to submit this person's information to get them their CPR card. Little things like that, where it's just like small little things that you have to close the loop or tie up that loose end. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that what you delivered at the end of the project meets what's called the definition of done, which is a fancy project way of saying, did we do what we said we were going to do? So at the beginning of the project, we said we will certify this many people, we will provide this degree of training, and we will do it in this time frame. Did we meet the elements of the definition of done for those things? Once you've confirmed that you did, you're going to now prepare your project closeout report. And the project closeout report, I did actually an episode on this, so you can go back and listen to that. It's called Closing a Project the Right Way. But the project closeout report is just a way for you to sum up everything you did, the key decision points, how much overtime you spent, what the schedule looked like, and importantly, any key lessons learned throughout the project. And this could just be things that at the beginning of the project you wish you'd known that would have made things easier. And the reason that that's so important is in the fire service, we do the same projects over and over and over again with very slight deviations or very slight modifications. So at some point in the future, somebody is going to run a project where they have to train a lot of people in CPR and stop the bleed. And if we can document all the things that we did that we wish we had known, or hey, I wish we'd known this, or I wish we'd known that, the next person that's going to run a similar project is going to be able to look back at those lessons learned and probably save a lot of time and money. And so it's really important that we take the time at the end of the project to write that project closeout report. Now, in this case, the project sponsor was actually the director of emergency management and workplace safety. And so at the conclusion of our last class, I reached out to him and basically just said, hey, what format do you want this project closeout report in? Would you prefer it in a PDF or a PowerPoint? He preferred a PowerPoint, so I took all the information, put it together in a PowerPoint, and I shared it first with all of our key stakeholders so that they could review it and make sure that they agreed with everything I put in there. And then the very last step, you're going to schedule a time to review the project closeout report with your project sponsor and any other people you think need to be there. So in this case, I had our head of school security and our project sponsor, and I invited a few other people. And essentially this meeting consists of you get your presentation, you review it and say, hey guys, this was the problem statement at the beginning of the project. This was our plan. This is how much we thought we were going to spend. This is how much we ended up spending. These are the deliverables. These are the things that we actually gave to you, which in this project was 160 CPR certified individuals, the training curriculum, all of the associated documentation, the schedules, and on and on. And then the last thing you're going to want is a signature from the project sponsor and yourself as the project manager saying, hey, this project is formally closed. We have received all of the deliverables, and this project is formally closed. Very, very critical that you close it out. You said, this project is done. Put a period at the end of it. Put a bow on it. And that's it. That is the run through of the 5 stages of this project. So let's just do a quick recap. We have initiation. So initiation is getting the project started. This is things like identifying the stakeholders, collecting requirements, putting together the team. We have our planning section, planning phase, which is building our scope document, creating our schedule, estimating our budget, figuring out all of the logistics, planning how the work is going to get done. Then we have our execution stage where we actually do the work. Then our monitoring stage, where we pick the metrics that we care about. These are the things we want to track, and we track them. And finally, we have our closing phase of the project, where we make sure all the loose ends are tied up, put together a report, and formally close the project. And the last thing I want to leave you with here is just remember that there are a lot of steps that the Project Management Institute outlines for a project. A key element of project management in the fire service is, yes, it's about knowing what work you have to do, but it's also about knowing what work you don't have to do. So I hope this has been helpful. And again, as always, if you have questions or topics you want us to cover, feel free to send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Captain Peter Younes, and this has been Project Command, bringing command level thinking to every project in the fire service.